Hi guys, this video is the second in my series about the Carpark app. So this is an application where we keep track of cars as they enter a car park, and we store the entry time in an SQLite database, and then when the cars leave we look up that entry in the database and we subtract it from the current time, and then we print out the duration of the stay. So in the previous video I wrote this program, which is basically just a terminal program that keeps track of cars entering the database. And what I want to have a look at in this video is migrating that so that we can do it through a web interface. Now the first thing is I'm going to use the Flask framework for Python. So Flask is a really popular framework which makes it easy to develop web applications. If you don't already have it, then you can install it by typing Python -m pip install --user Flask. Now I've already installed it, so when I enter this, it's just going to tell me you've already got it. At least it hopefully is there. There we go. Okay, so once you've done that, you're ready to start using Flask. The first thing is let's create a simple, minimal website. So I'm going to write a bit of Python code into Notepad++ here. The reason I'm using Notepad++ is because I can then have another tab with my HTML. So first of all, the Python part, I need to import Flask. Then I need to create a Flask app. So I'm just going to put app equals flask.flask with a capital F, ___ name, ___ close brackets. So what this does is it creates a new Flask application, and this provides the name of the program file. And Flask needs that so that it knows which directory is going to be the root of your server. Okay, now once we've made an app, we can add all sorts of different routes into that app. So a route is basically like a web page. When you go to that particular location on the server, it's going to perform some kind of action. Now, first of all, we just add the root. That is the page which appears if you don't type any particular page and just go to the root of the server. So I write app.root and then just put a slash. Now I'm going to define a function. So I'm going to call this front. It actually doesn't really matter what I call the function here. And then I'll just say hello from Flask. Okay, now I'm going to save this into the folder, the same folder that I used to write my Carpark program in the previous video. And it's very important that I call this Python file app.py. Now the reason is because Python expects the main program to be in a file called app.py. It is possible to save it under a different file name, but then you have to do a little bit of extra configuration, and we just don't want that hassle. So let's call it the default name of app.py. Now I'm going to go back to my command line, and I need to use the cd command to go into the folder where my Flask application has been created. So if I just type that out here, and then once I'm in the right folder, and you can see here are the files that I've written, then I run my Flask server by typing Python -m flask run, and I want to run it in debug mode, so I put --debug. Now when you're running in debug mode, it's much more convenient for developing your site, because firstly you don't have to restart the server if you change files, and secondly you're going to get lots of error feedback. So let's add in that --debug and then press enter, and in a moment you can see it starts up the Flask web server. Now I've got the web address to go and view my site here, so I'm just going to copy that and then go to my web browser and paste it in. I've actually already got it here, and when I press enter it goes to the main page, and you can see it says hello from Flask. So what's happening is that when we go to this web address, the Flask web server is identifying that we've gone to the root, we haven't entered any particular page, and therefore it's running the function which comes after this app.root decorator, and this function at the moment is just returning some text. I could put HTML in here, so for example if I put the b command in and save that and just go back to the website and reload. It's taken a moment there. I think it's probably just updating a bit. There we go. It did take a little while, but there we go. So hello from Flask, and Flask is in bold now. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, let's try and get my app working, my Carpark app working through this website. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new route. Let's call this /park. Okay, now I've got the code that I used for my car parking app here. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste a lot of this code and put it into the Flask app. Now, the first part of the code is just setting up this database table if it doesn't exist. So I'm going to put that into a separate function. I'll call this initializeDB. The reason I'm putting it into a separate function is because I don't want to be creating that table every time somebody accesses a web page. So I basically just want to run it once when I start my Flask server. So if I put this in here and then connection.close and then run initializeDB at the same time that I create my Flask web server. Just delete this part. Okay, and that means that when I start the Flask web server, it's going to create this database where I can store my car information. Okay, now what about in this park route? Well, inside that function, this is where I need to perform the actual query functions. So again, inside this function, I need to create a connection to the database. I need to create a cursor. Now, the registration at the moment, I'm getting it through an input command. Obviously, that's not going to work on the web, so we're going to change that in a moment. Then I perform a query against the database and fetch the result. That part is fine. And then I'm looking at the query to decide whether the car has entered or exited the database. The only thing I'm going to change here is that instead of trying to print on the screen, I'm going to return, and I could return text if I wanted to return an HTML page, but actually I want to return JSON data. So I'm going to use a Python dictionary, and I'm just going to provide a little bit of JSON data here. So I'm going to return, first of all, the type of action. So was it entering or leaving the car park? And then if I entered the car park, I'll provide the entry time, like that. And then in this part, what I'm going to do is return, and again, I'll use some JSON. So this time the type is a departure, and the time, sorry, I don't want the time, I want the duration. So the duration is going to be the time delta. I could provide the time as well, of course, but let's just keep it simple. Okay, and then I need to close the connection. So most of this code I've just copied directly over from my program. Now, the catch is that I can't use input to read in user input from the terminal. Instead, what I need to do is get a parameter that is passed when we access the web page. Now, there's a fairly easy way to do that. What I'm going to do is after app.root, I'm going to write methods equals. Now, if we want to send methods, if we want to send data to a web page, there are two methods we can use: the get method or the post method. At the moment, we're just going to use the get method. So I'll write methods equals and then put get in square brackets. Now, to get that information, I write flask.request.args.get, and then the arg that I want to get is the registration. So I'll just put reg here. Okay, this should be ready to use now. So what I'm going to do is just first of all go back to my server, reload it. Now, to access this web page that I created, I need to go to the /park route. So I'm going to put /park. And then I'm going to provide the reg argument. So this argument, reg, I can enter into the URL by writing reg equals, and then I'm going to write the registration number. So ABC1234 as an example. If I enter that, you can see that I get the JSON data back from this web page. So what it's saying here is the car with that registration number has entered the database, and here's the timestamp. If I reload that page now, we can see that the second time, oh, I've made a mistake in the JSON, but it does recognize that it's departing from the car park. I'm just going to go back here and change that, because what I should have written, of course, was duration is time delta without quotation marks. Let's test it again. I'll hit reload. There it is entering the database. And then reload again. I think it's just Flask updating that website. And there we go. There's the duration of the stay, which in this case was about 8.7 seconds. Okay, so this video is enough to show how we can add this JSON interface into the website. Now, the next step is going to be to create an HTML page so that the user isn't seeing this JSON data. We're going to have an HTML front end, and that's going to provide all of the services in a more visually presentable way. And then the back end is going to be using this JSON interface to perform the functions that it needs to perform. But that's it for this video. So I hope all of that made sense, guys.